We decided to do the Jazz Singer when Abrons Art Center approached us about doing a local story. And since the Jazz Singer is set on the Lower East Side, actually right on Orchard Street, we thought this would be a really interesting place to start. Of course, the Jazz Singer is known mostly for being the first talkie in 1927. It's also known notoriously as being a vehicle for Al Jolson to perform in blackface. And while we were interested at this moment in working on something that's a problematic piece of art and sort of trying to tackle what it means to be making something in the shadow of something we're afraid of.
I did not know much about the Jazz Singer when we were first talking about the project, and decided to watch it. And through actually watching the piece, I felt very much the New Yorkness of it, how much of a role New York played in it, particularly the Lower East Side, like an immigrant family coming to America. What does it mean to be in America, and what does it mean to fight against who you think you are, who you think you want to be, who your family thinks you should be? And all of that was in the Jazz Singer.
When Nehemiah approached me about the project, he said, "What do you know about the Jazz Singer?" And I knew very little. And he said, "Well, one of the most interesting things about it is that there's no jazz." So we're thinking about putting some in.
I mean, it's interesting you talked about grappling with a problematic material. I think one of the things that may be problematic about the original movie is that there is no jazz in it. But I want to ask the question, what makes a piece of work problematic?
I think that a lot of that has to do with how fast society is progressing and moving forward, and realizing some of the ways that we made art and how certain voices were left out, how stories were told that were very inauthentic, stories were told mainly for entertainment value of the white gaze. Jazz Singer is interesting because when you look at it in terms of its cultural context, there was nothing weird about the blackface in Jazz Singer, even though it is not mandatory for the story. But of course, if you have Al Jolson in your film and it's 1927, you're probably going to have blackface.
Coming from a Jewish background myself, I came to this story being very interested in what it means to be a secular Jew right now, and kind of having moved away from my upbringing. At the same time, I think because by default of there being this image of blackface, I started wondering if it is in fact my story to tell. And that scared me.
So I think that a large part of this process, of this project, has been to find ways to amplify more voices, so that, one, bringing the jazz back to Jazz Singer, two, connecting with other communities specifically that are also very a part of this American story that the film was trying to highlight.
And really embodying the Lower East Side right now, how it's changed from being a Jewish ghetto at the turn of the century to becoming a much more vibrant, diverse neighborhood, to becoming, unfortunately, what it is now, a little bit more of a gentrified mall.
And
There's a semi-autobiographical nature to, I think, you all's way into the storytelling, so I'm curious about why that way.
I think it's about fear, right?
Yeah.
We've been working on this for almost 2 years now, and we've brought in a lot of different sources, including Langston Hughes, including James Baldwin, including tons of musicologists from that period and also beyond in terms of the world of jazz.
And the journey that we took through the creating of it, I think it was a great moment when we kind of saw that, oh, the process that we had is a part of the story of how we have wrestled with this work.
What is everyone's relationship to jazz?
I grew up with it, not as a little kid, but when I was 13, my parents bought a jazz club. While they were appreciators, they weren't necessarily jazz aficionados. Jazz was what she wanted to offer the community that it didn't already have.
What is the synopsis, the basic story of this source material?
It is about Al Jolson, who portrays a young Jewish man who comes from a very conservative Jewish family, and there's every expectation that Al Jolson, who plays the character Jakey, will become a cantor himself. He runs away from home instead to become a secular Broadway singer.
Well, it makes me want to ask you, Frank, as one of the producers, why this show?
I knew that I wanted to do the show because, Black history is not just Black history, but it's also Asian history. It's about Latino history. It's because there's so much Black American history that affects not only you guys, but also us as Asian people as well.
I'm curious now about, there's themes of jazz singer, these themes of whose voice gets amplified, these themes of erasure. It's called jazz singer, there's no jazz in it.
Also assimilation
Also
and
assimilation
appropriation.
and appropriation. So with all of that in mind, in what ways does the themes of Jazz Singer, the original film or story, in what ways are they bumping up against and or dancing with the process of making this play?
I think a lot about accountability. And I think it's interesting that in this piece, Nehemiah and I are co-creating it. But as much as I'm the director and Nehemiah's the music director, we're also performing in it. And we've also kind of brought on this incredible group of artists. And I think we're trying to upset a couple traditional theatrical hierarchies here and sort of trying to approach this piece a little bit more like a jazz band, or a jazz ensemble. Like, what does it mean for us to be in a room and listen to each other and try to create something together?
From a theatrical point of view, what is the role of technology in this piece?
We're interested in the tension between the acoustic, the analog, the digital. There's a real clash between all of these forms that sort of encompasses the entirety of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. So we have acoustic instruments, we have piano, we have saxophone. We also have LPs that we are manipulating live, and also a lot of video projection as well, including live video projection.
Not to mention that every single performance we're going to have be a professional jazz improviser, which is, I think, extraordinary in what we're doing.
Alfonso Horn, this incredible trumpet player, is actually going to be curating our jazz guests, and we are going to have a different jazz musician joining us on stage and improvising with us every single night.
We talked about fear earlier. That's where I'm living. I'm living in the fear of that.
So much art today, so much theater today, I think, is situated in, I guess, what can be seen as a kind of protest art. A kind of protest theater that is saying, this is the issue of this day, and this is what I want you to engage in, and this is the lesson I have to teach you. There seems to be something more complicated and complex about the way you all are trying to create this show, and I'm interested in how do you see, ultimately, this show, The Jazz Singer, in our current political context.
It's so interesting that this piece of work that was made in 1927 has managed to enter into like our cultural consciousness, and we all have things to say about it, even though most of us have never seen it. It is a question of how we got here, how we got to our current cancel culture, how we got to where we are. There are so many things that are kind of tied up in this story, because I think there's so much in it, even the things that aren't in it, about race, about religion, about what it means to be an immigrant. Like, the story, as it moves around and is shining its light on Al Jolson, there are all of these other stories in the shadows, and I love that we are searching the shadows for some more stories.
In that respect, we are interested in engaging the mistakes that were made, maybe knowingly, maybe not knowingly at that time, and also trying to identify the mistakes we're making now that maybe in 100 years we will be terribly aware of in hindsight.
What will be our toxic cultural artifacts that we are leaving as a society that our great-grandchildren will say, oh, gross.
I think what I'm going to take away from this experience is that when I came into it, before coming into it, all I knew about the jazz singer was blackface. And I had no reference or point of view beyond that. Just that word in quotes, and I didn't give it any more thought than that. I believe I will be leaving where I am now, which is, this was a story about Jewish life and Jewish culture made at a time when no one was making films about Jewish life and Jewish culture.
Yeah, and it's just fascinating to me because it proves that history is not linear, that these events that we think neatly lined up and stacked up together to get us to where we are at our most liberated selves may not really be the truth of the matter, and that for so long, so many people who have had the keys to the kingdom have controlled history, thereby controlling time. And to be able to go back and dig up time is something that's actually happening all the time.
Yeah.
Like it is what our government is doing by rewriting history. It's what textbooks are doing by taking out stories of slavery or stories about women. It's the America works and runs forward by rewriting the time
past.
that it has come from. And so it's really fascinating to watch you all kind of dig through all this stuff, because it reminds me of this James Baldwin quote, which is that history is not just a set of facts in a textbook, but it is how we got here. And what's great to see you all do is to investigate the question of how did we get here, albeit through the framework and context of this piece of historic film.
Yeah.